Hello, everyone. This is Caillou, and welcome back to the daily Moxtober recap videos. Moxtober is a yearly event where, for each day in the month of October, there's a one-word prompt based on which people make various, creative pursuits around custom magic, but usually just card designs. In these videos, I go over a small subset of the cards that were submitted to the shared MSC set file to look at how people interpreted the prompt differently and were inspired. Um, if you want to see all of the prompts, submit your own cards, or see the full set file, all of those are in the description. But today, as always, I'm joined by an esteemed guest from the custom community, and today it's going to be Legion.
Hello, I am Legion, the least esteemed possible guest that Caillou could have chosen. I am mostly known for my Cursed Cube, which is a custom magic cube for people who think that token planeswalkers or the curses and count spells that look forward in time are all a great idea. Oh, and affinity for spells and abilities, that's there as well. So that's what I'm most known for. I love designs that do things that are technically within the rules of magic, but why would you do them? Um, so I'm excited to have a look at some of these card designs, which are probably not quite as spicy as what I would have come up with, but we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see how we
what
go.
is? But yeah, in general, I think that past 2 days we've also had similarly, I guess, out there or custom magic designers, custom magic designer uh, personalities in Espadil and Leet. And I loved the sort of nothing is impossible perspective that they brought to the table, but also with like clear, good design fundamentals that I think is usually the a stumbling point for people who have big ambitions in custom magic spaces. So I suspect this will be pretty similar in that respect. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. Shall we get to the first card?
Yeah, hit me with it.
Okay, so this is Village Justice by Jean the Supreme. It is an enchantment costing 3 and a red, and it has creatures you control have haste and tap. This creature deals 1 damage to any target. Only activate only if this creature entered the battlefield this turn. It also has 3 black, sacrifice Village Justice, destroy each creature that was dealt damage this turn. So my thoughts on this card are I love the thing that it's trying to do. I don't think it does that very well because it's a 4 mana do nothing enchantment, and the payoff also just you can't pay for the thing that it's trying to do and the creatures that you need to have enter the battlefield on the same turn.
Yeah, the sequencing on this is awkward. I like you said, I like the idea, but especially like the pairing of abilities makes a lot of sense, right? We've seen a bunch of Vraska's finisher style stuff in black, pingers are in red. It's a good marriage and that is both mechanically and flavorfully interesting. The problem is how often are you going to get to use it when like you need creatures like you're paying 9 mana into this to do the thing in installments, but you also just cannot have any creatures enter the battlefield those turns unless you already have engines set up in previous turns to do that, in which case this feels a little win more.
Yeah, like so if you're just using it for the Wrath, then it's basically you're paying for like In Garrick's Wake in installments. And I only remember In Garrick's Wake because of how terrible a card it is. Like one-sided Wraths are good, but they're not good enough to justify that kind of mana investment. And I feel like the ping ability on its own, if you want to leave it out for a bit and use the ping ability to control the board a bit, and then cash it in a bit later, that would be great if it didn't have the activate only if this creature enters the battlefield this turn ability. Because I I don't feel like you get to use it that often. Like on the turn it comes down, you basically have to have some other free token producer or something coming in from spend or some other way of getting a creature that doesn't actually cost you mana, at least on that turn. And then your payoff is you get to ping some things a couple of times, and then in later turns you maybe get to do it again a few times, and then maybe when you're on turn 8 and you can afford some creatures and afford the kill thing, then you get to do that.
Yeah,
I
and
love
even
what
then,
this
it's
is.
like Hordling Outburst plus this is the only way you're getting like maximum value.
Yeah, and I feel like if it didn't have either if it didn't cost as much, like I feel like it could easily cost one less on both ends. Or when we were looking at this a bit earlier, you suggested remove the activate only if this creature entered the battlefield this turn.
Yeah, and then bump it
I
up
I
to
feel
five
like
mana to compensate.
and then bump it up 5 mana to compensate, because I feel like if all of your things have the ping ability, that's a decent piece of control tech anyway, and then you can cash it in for the Wrath if you need a one-sided Wrath desperately. I I love what this card is trying to do. I want this card to be really good, but I think one of the problems that you mentioned people like me designing cards that are pushing the boundaries of what Magic can do, but are also actually good while they're doing that, like good design principles while they're doing that. I think this card is trying too hard to be clever. Like it's going, these abilities have nice synergy. This one feeds into this one, but I think it's trying too hard to be clever, and it's not really acknowledging that the play pattern is actually secretly terrible.
See, I actually feel the opposite. I think that usually when a card is trying to be too clever, it is in a way that ignores the fundamental like issues with the play pattern. I guess what for me, I think that this is actually trying to be too safe in a sense, right? Like the costs are jacked up. It has the activate only this creature enter the battlefield this turn. This feels like someone rather than being too cheeky, they're being a little too cautious about the design because they are worried about the potential for it to be like a one-sided rat, which I understand. But again, they're not giving. They're like, oh, these are cool abilities that go together, but they're not giving appropriate room for their concept to breathe.
Yeah, I think we kind of mean the same thing, but we're phrasing it in opposite ways. Like
No, actually,
I
I
think
think I'm right and you're wrong. Actually, no, yeah, I agree.
no,
I'm just.
no,
It's just like the way that I
because
usually see that term used. But again, if we mean the same thing, we mean the same thing.
yeah, but by clever, I mean it's trying too hard to make the abilities synergistic in a cool way, without actually making sure that that cool way of synergizing is costed appropriately, or that all the restrictions are actually necessary. I think it's trying to make the abilities work together, but it's trying so hard to make the abilities work together that they actually don't work together, or even separately.
Yeah, I agree. But ultimately, I think the concept is cool. And again, it just takes a few quick cost adjustments or removing restrictions to let this actually shine. Because again, even in a buffed state, this is a limited board stall breaker or a constructed like interaction check essentially. Um,
Yeah, I'd I'd almost be interested to see this with the initial cost low and then keep the sacrifice cost a bit unrealistic, just so it's like a way of cashing in your early game card later, and then keep the restriction. But I also don't like, there's lots of different ways you can turn the dial, because there's at least three different dials you can turn on this card: the initial cost, the sacrifice cost, and whether or not it has the restriction. That's less of a dial and more an on off switch. But there's ways you can go with this card where there's multiple states where I think it could be reasonable. I don't know which one of those is necessarily the correct one. I suspect it's the one that you said, where you just take off the activate only if and bump the cost up one more.
yeah,
It
I
depends
think
what kind of
ultimately,
role you
yeah.
want.
Sorry, good.
But again, it's a good first draft, and you can definitely build it into a card that
Yeah,
works.
and I think it's one of those things where like because there are so many different ways it could be tuned, I think that's a sign again that the initial concept is good. Because usually, if a card is bad, like has a bad concept, the only way you can tune it is just to say no. So yeah,
Hmm.
TLDR,
Yeah.
good concept. Could use some more iterations. We've all been there. Hit us with the
Hmm.
next card.
Yeah, so the next card is For the Good of All. So it's 2 black and a green for an enchantment with at the beginning of each end step, if you've sacrificed a creature this turn, discard 3 cards. But it also has sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards.
And this
And
is
the flavor text
designed
is
by, oh sorry, designed by
oh sorry, this is
Provocative.
designed by Provocative. Yes, I should have said that. Designed by Provocative. And the flavor text is every year one is chosen from among the villagers to sate the dragon's hunger. So flavor wise, well, one of the things this is referencing is just the standard sort of fairy tale, not fairy tale, but like the standard melodrama of, you know, oh, the princess being sent to be sacrificed. Like it's the George and the Dragon story, basically. Like every year the village sends one person, and this year it's going to send the princess, so a knight has to show up because apparently all of the villagers weren't worth saving, but the princess was. Anyway, I'm criticizing old tales, but the point is it's sort of a reference to that. Um, I in terms of mechanics, I feel like there's 2 ways you can do this. One is you just create so many creatures that the discarding 3 cards is outweighed by how many cards you're drawing. The other mode, the sort of secret mode on it, is putting out one creature a turn and sacrificing it just so you can draw 3 cards a turn. And then if you can play all 3 of those cards, you never actually have to bother with the discarding 3 cards at the end of turn because you're just you're just drawing and then playing all of the cards you're using.
Yeah,
So
this is
there's
good
at
in like.
least
Go ahead.
I'm just thinking about there's multiple ways to play this card that that immediately makes me like it. Where there's one thing that feels kind of obvious to do with it, and one thing that feels slightly less obvious to do with it. I'm sure um, there's other ways of doing it as well. But I like the fact that it has multiple possible avenues for using the card to do different strategies with it.
Yeah, for sure. Um, this is based on the canon enchantment Greater Good. 2 green, sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to its power, then discard 3 cards. So this is like the go wide version, and that's the go tall version. I do think that this card, like, I don't know if Greater Good has any infinites, but I'm pretty sure, like, if you have anything, like, I don't know, like a Locust God adjacent that makes tokens when you draw cards, you can probably do some silly because the discard isn't baked into the trigger like Greater Good. It's a lot easier to force yourself into card positive positions. But going back to what you were saying earlier, I like what you were mentioning about uh, how this plays on an empty hand because I think that token generators are usually the sort of cards that work best in decks that want small games. I've been talking about small games versus large games a lot in this Moxtober year, but stuff like Lingering Souls or like Bitter Blossom, right, where you just run opponents out of resources and then you just have like a slight advantage that allows you to eke out games over them. And this feels like a pretty good small game card in that respect.
Hmm.
But yeah, this seems like this is one of my favorite cards I've seen from Moxtober. Even if I'm dubious on how balanced it is, it feels like the type of riff I love making for Cube. Like this feels like a insane Cube like quote unquote signpost where it's like okay yeah like let me just lock this in and then find some like dumb infinite or just use it for crazy value or whatever.
Yeah, and I think the infinites, if you do have, if you do have some kind of card that creates a creature when, whenever you draw a card, I think that's difficult to pull off. The reward of drawing your deck and then having to have a third card in order to do anything by drawing your deck. I mean, maybe you're making more creatures than you're sacrificing, and that's a thing. But like when you're playing cards that are that expensive, I feel like you're entitled to that like two card sort of infinite combo at that point. Maybe I'm just it obviously depends what format this is for. It depends what it's bounced around, but I I don't mind the fact it lets you do that in principle. Like in practice, it might be too strong for whatever format it's in, but I think that's like a fine way to use that, like a fine and legitimate way to use that card rather than something that breaks it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that like it's good for cards to have aspirational ceilings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like yeah, I would want the like yeah the high point of the card and the quote unquote fair use case of the card to be at least a little bit different. So that there's avenue for it to do more than just what it does. Because the point of Magic cards, they interact with other cards to produce beneficial synergistic effects. So having a card that is capable of working with other cards to produce something that makes a lot
Emergence
of card
TM.
advantage. Yeah, emergent gameplay. Yeah, exactly. Um, one thing I will say is like on the flavor. Like I know it's referencing the standard sort of George and the Dragon style myth of someone getting sacrificed to save the village from the dragon's wrath or whatever. I don't know what that has to do with the drawing and discarding mechanics. Like you'd think if it was sacrificing one person to protect someone else, then it would have some kind of ability that protected people. I don't see that on the card. Like and the fact that you can sacrifice as many creatures as you want in one turn, in fact, actually rewards sacrificing as many creatures as you can in the shortest possible space of time. That to me doesn't feel like it's representing a regular recurrence of someone being sacrificed. It feels like the mechanics are sort of
Yeah,
almost there with the flavor, but they're a little bit off.
yeah. Again, it's because it's a greater good reference. I think it was just sort of one of those things where they were like, "Oh yeah, this is a story where a person sacrifices himself for the greater good. This is a reference to greater good,
Hmm.
ergo." And but then the mechanics when it's changed from go tall to go wide, it requires a bit of a different story. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
before we move on to the next card, this is missing artist credit, but it is by John Tedrick, who goes by the username Tedrick94 on ArtStation. TEDRICK 94. So just a
Yeah,
quick amendment.
credit your artists, guys. Like obviously, you know, I am an artist. I usually do all my card arts, and the amount of effort that goes into making an MTG style card art is immense. Artists do like ridiculous amounts of work. The least you can do if you're going to take their art and put it on your own thing is credit the artists. Please remember to credit artists.
Yeah,
This has
because
been a
again,
public statement announcement.
because the main thing is like you are using it for a non-commercial purpose, sure, but you are still using it and sharing it, and people are going to want to know where it comes from, and so that they can appreciate that artist too. And maybe I've definitely seen people say this doesn't happen, but I've seen it happen where people find artists through like custom magic cards. I'm like, cool, I want to commission them for my own card or for like a birthday gift or something. So pay it forward, guys. It costs literally nothing, and it's the best way that we can like show appreciation for these people who are unknowingly, in most cases, providing the backbone for the custom magic community. Um,
See, I just bypass this by doing all of my own art, which is definitely a sane way to do custom magic, and I will not hear any arguments to the contrary.
mhm. This is definitely sustainable, and I think everyone who makes a custom set should do this.
Absolutely. Right. Shall we go on to the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
one rather
yeah.
than
Hit me with the
memeing?
next card.
Um, okay, so the next one is helpful villagers. So it costs four and a white. It is a creature human, and it has whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, you may choose any one of a +1/+1 counter a flying counter, a lifelink counter, or a vigilance counter. Put that type of counter on that creature. And the flavor text is you look like you need a place to clean up and rest. There's a place right up the street that can help. And the card is a 1/4 creature and it is designed by Alchemy Prime. So the reason I picked this is a lot of the cards in the file are trying to do something big and complicated and clever and multiple parts and gears turning. This is a rare. It sort of maybe has to be a rare, but it's doing something that's relatively straightforward. It's not trying to, you know, rock anyone's world. It is a good it is a card with a powerful enough effect. Perhaps I would want it at a higher power and toughness, maybe, or maybe if you're feeling spicy, a lower mana value. But just the fact that it's a good, clean, simple effect, when I think a lot of custom designers get a bit wrapped up in trying to do something clever, and sometimes you just need a card that does the thing, and I think this card does the thing.
Yeah, I think
And
people don't have like a respect sometimes for just like slots are meant to be filled, right? And that doesn't mean that you should have a card that does stone cold nothing. Like, but you should sometimes not every card you make is going to be like a crazy haymaker. Not every card that you make is going to be like something that people remember for years and years. Sometimes it just is about providing texture and like a feeling of variety to your limited and constructed offerings. And like
yeah,
this feels like a great flavor point too. Like
yeah, I think
obviously it's like a little generic, but I think that like if this was in an actual set and not a one off, I imagine that you can like specificize it a little bit more.
I don't think that's a word, but I'm gonna roll with it anyway because I know what you mean. I yeah, I like the fact that it's like these are some villagers that will have the thing that you need, whatever that happens to be. Do you need some healing? Do you need some armor? Do you need um something to keep you awake? Do you need a pair of wings out of nowhere? Apparently, whatever it is, we have it. And I think obviously the flying feels like an odd one out, but that is an ability that's in wiped. It just feels like flavor wise, it feels odd for some random people to be just like, oh, you've stayed night at the inn, inn and now you fly. Um, like I can see any of the others for you're rested up and you have more power and toughness. You've rested up and you can heal yourself. You've rested up and you can stay awake for longer. Um, so the flavor's a bit odd on that point. Um, but I like the mechanical effect in general as it's just a toolbox to give your creatures whatever counter they need. And like I imagine it, if it were in a set, it would be some kind of counters theme. Maybe something that cares about different counters on creatures you control, maybe something like that. And that kind of mechanical effect would fit it.
But yeah, I think you've pretty much summed it up. I don't have any deeper thoughts on this. Let's move on to the next card.
One other thing is whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, that does include this. I would reword this to whenever helpful villagers or another creature you control enters the battlefield, because otherwise people are going to miss that it does that, if that's the intention.
Yeah, that
Which I
stands.
think it is, because I don't think I can justify it being that low power and toughness unless that's the intention at that cost. But yeah, so just think about the wordings of your cards because the first one we had had enters the battlefield instead of entered the battlefield, and it was missing a quotation mark. And this one has some
Yeah,
slightly unfair
th-
wording as
this
well.
one still works. I think it just comes down to intention.
It
And
works. It works. Yeah, the wording isn't wrong here, but I think it could be worded better. Like this is correct wording that does the things it's probably intended to do. I would just reword it a little bit to make it clear that that's what it does.
Yeah, makes sense.
So the next card we have today is, let me just check to see if I've got the right one. Yep, Outlands Rabble Rouser. So this is 2 red and a green for creature centaur warrior, and when Outlands Rabble Rouser enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another non-land permanent. If you do, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls, or Outlands Rabble Rouser fights target creature an opponent controls. It's a 4/4 and it's designed by Tahanu. So the first thing I want to say about this is the wording on this one. If you word it like this, it takes both targets, which is weird and probably not how you intend it to work. So I believe how it's worded currently, you end up choosing which one of those things it does on resolution, which is not what you want it to do. So you want it to use choose one formatting if you want it to choose the mode on activation. Because I think at the moment it takes both targets and then it chooses which one it's actually going to do on
Right,
resolution. It has to
and
have both those targets.
which obviously it's supposed to be like a quote unquote fail case. Each one is supposed to be a fail case for the other, which doesn't quite work out in that way.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, you need to say if you do choose one and then have destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls, Outlands Rabble Rouser fights target creature an opponent controls. So again, just like I know wording is kind of boring. Like it's not the most exciting part of the card, but it does also need to be correct, otherwise your card will do the wrong thing. You know, like that's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
like
But yeah, as for what the
it
yeah,
needs
this
to
is
be
the
said.
case where
So
the where what the card does is sort of like there are cases where like yeah, the wording I think needs to be better, but also you can intuitively get what this card is trying to do, and I think that it presents to me like this makes me intrigued for whatever environment it's in because it tells me that there are probably some degree of both disposable and important artifact and enchantments. Um, if because a 4/4 that fights on ETB, even with needing another cost, is pretty damn good. So I'm assuming that for the other mode to be like obviously modality is always like worth it, but assuming that the other mode pulls its weight, this is probably an environment where like there are a significant number of important artifact and enchantments, and I also love the idea that this is like this is like the archetype uncommon for like like a sack archetype in red green, which red is definitely part of it a lot, but green, despite its token producing, is rarely part of aristocrats archetypes, and I like that. Or even if not aristocrats archetypes, just generally like disposable permanent start archetype. I like that this sort of points in that direction. It gives me like
yeah, I feel like it that's what I think when I see that. That's what I assume. Like not being able to see what rarity it's intended to be because that's not in the file. That it gives me Archon vibes definitely. And yeah, I think assuming it does what I'm guessing it's supposed to, I think it's reasonably balanced. It's pushed, but it's Archon pushed and not going to break the game pushed. So yeah, I just I like it. It's apart from the wording issue, I think it's good, clean fun for, like you say, an archetype that appears in a pair of colors that it totally could appear in, but we don't see it that often in those colors. And I would like to see, yeah, I think it's definitely a good card for those colors and that archetype.
yeah, and I guess like one more thing that
Mm,
this makes me think is just I like this just gives me the vibe of like I guess the reason it makes me think of it as like a limited card is the amount of information it gives you from a single card. It like usually people will like show off booster packs for their sets and then like you can try and infer stuff from it. This from a single card alone shows so much. So yeah, basically just restating that.
Yeah.
Okay, what's
Yeah.
up next?
I think it's a good one. So up next we have Rouse the Country Folk. So this is 2 black and a red for an instant, which says creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies this turn, exile it and amass zombies too. And the slave text says, "See now those who prey upon thee! With my power we shall excise them!" And this is made by Sean9299. So the art here for anyone who's listening and not watching is someone who is clearly a necromancer leading a torch wielding, pitchfork wielding mob, and just from the art and the flavor text and the actual mechanics of it, it's so obvious that it's like this is a guy who is leading a bunch of unwitting fools into a slaughter where they're all going to die and get raised as zombies by this same
Or
necromancer
well,
person who is
sorry,
tricking
wording
them.
correction there. They're going to be raised as zombie.
They're going to be raised as zombie army with lots of +1/+1 counters on it. Yes, I consider zombie army to be basically zombies. Um, but yeah, I think flavor wise, zombie army is fine to be zombies. Obviously mechanically, yeah, it's a single zombie. I think that's fine. It being because like so mechanically, this is sorry, I think that's a rare symbol. Sorry, in the file they're all listed as commons, even if they're
Yeah,
not. I
that's
think that's a
definitely a
rare
rare
symbol.
symbol. Yeah.
Yeah.
This feels like it could
Sorry,
be
my
uncommon or common. Like it's basically just like trumpet
that's what I was
blast.
thinking. Yeah.
It like maybe not common. Maybe common's a little much because of how much it.
I think it could be uncommon. Um, and if there's a decent aristocrats or creatures you control dying archetype, I think this could get away with, or an amass archetype. I think that this could get away with being an Archon, maybe. I don't know. Archons probably want to be creatures, but I don't
No,
know
no,
if you have a
it
sort of
definitely could be because this really just feels
it,
like
it- yeah,
maybe if it was
it
like a
feels
little
like
bit
it's
more
one of those
like
things.
because I think that it is in a weird spot where like you want to be picking a lot of archons, but trumpet blasts are usually cards that you want like a two of in your deck usually. So there is a tension there, but also this I think that the upside here is well worth wanting more copies in your deck. Though I guess it works
Yeah,
less well in multiples because when the zombie token dies, you don't get to amass again. So yeah, maybe honestly, I don't think that this is too far away from being like put like maybe burn me at the stake, but I think that this is not too far away from being a fine common in the right environment. Which people are gonna be like, what? It's strictly better trumpet. It's strictly better trumpet blast, but like in a way where you need a lot of value already. You need to be making a lot of trades and like black red like multicolored commons are already like trying to like they get a little bit more power budget. So
I think the other thing is because it says non-token creature. A lot of the time, this kind of go wide deck is trying to shovel tokens onto the battlefield in order to do its thing, forcing them to be actual card creatures in order to get the MS zombies thing. I think that acts as a decent limiter on it as well in terms of how big the zombies are going to be. Like, obviously, the tokens still get the +2/+0, which I think is correct. I think that's how it should work. But it's sort of the non-token creature control you control dying puts a damper on how ridiculous the zombies can get. Um, I would prefer it at uncommon over common, but I think that there exists an environment that this can exist at common. I don't think that that is every environment. Which I don't think you're saying that it is every environment, but it has it
what
has
if I
limiters in the right
am?
places.
Hashtag every set should be a multicolor set.
Well, I mean, I don't hate it at common either. But I think this makes a decent archetype on common. I think it has limiters in the right places. It's sort of go
And
wide,
it's very clean
aggro.
and intuitive in a way that I think that cards which are usually this flavorful can sometimes fall into the trap of like expounding on their flavor through the mechanics in a way that takes away from both. This has appropriate restraint, and like you said, like it doesn't come out and tell you outright what's happening, but you can easily put the pieces together, and lots of that comes from, again, the mechanics being so straightforward and simple.
Yeah, the mechanics are straightforward and simple. The art and the flavor text and the mechanics go well they go together so well. I think the name could play a part in that and is not currently playing a part in that. But I don't think it needs to. I think the rest of it like the name feels like it could be on any card that is giving power and toughness boosts and doesn't have to do with the zombie thing. It feels like it's a little bit less
Like
specific than the rest of it.
I would bet at least, if someone had asked me, I would bet at least $20 that this is already a card in original Innistrad. Like just from name alone. Like, yeah, gather the townsfolk exists. You're telling me rouse the country folk doesn't exist? Come on.
Yeah, I think I like this card pretty much entirely. The name feels a little bit generic. I wanted a vaguely Innistrad card, or something of that caliber. I feel like it could be more specific to the actual thing that it's trying to do. But honestly, uh, apart from that, like at least 9 out of 10, maybe even 10 out of 10, I like this. I think that it's balanced. I think the mechanics and flavor work together absolutely beautifully. I think I have to ding it a point for
Card,
being a rare when it just doesn't have to be.
yeah.
But otherwise, it's a great card.
Card good.
Card good, yes, absolutely. So shall we go on to our
Yeah.
next one? Okay, so our next one is Village Meeting. So this is a sorcery for 3 and a white with create a 1/1 white citizen creature token. Then you may tap any number of untapped creatures you control. Choose X, where X is the number of creatures tapped this way. So you can destroy target artifact or enchantment, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature, and or target player draws a card. So
Oh,
there is a
and it's
lot.
designed
Oh,
by Feline.
yes, designed by Storyfeel. I keep on forgetting to say who designed these cards, which feels really bad after my rant about crediting artists. I should probably credit card designers.
Well, see,
Um,
you're just the guest. It actually falls on me as the person who is profiting from the work of these hapless, starving artists. I'm actually the evil one in this scenario. So you're all
Phew,
good.
you should feel it. You should feel ashamed, Caillou. I have no further notes. So village meeting. So obviously you need to be tapping some of your creatures in order for this to be worth it, because creating a 1/1 white citizen creature token is not worth it on its own. Um, if you manage to go all modes, I think destroy target artifact or enchantment, put 2+1/+1 counters on target creature, target player draws a card, and you get the white citizen creature token. I think that's fair for 3 mana, so 4 mana, and essentially you're tapping 2 creatures because you're getting one free that you can tap. I think if you manage to do all the modes, that's fair. If you don't need the destroy target artifact or enchantment mode, that's also pretty reasonable. So you're creating a 3/3 essentially and drawing a card by tapping another creature. That's not awful. The worry is I feel like you need to be submitting at least 2 for this, and you're basically always submitting draw a card and put counters, and then if you can, you're destroying the artifact or enchantment.
Yeah, I think that's
Or
fine
if you have
actually,
a
because I think that like it's effectively tap an untap creature you control, you make it 3/3 and draw a card with potential flexibility. And I think that like that's a fine that's a fine card. And I think that this sort of modal card is a perfect place to put this sort of not always needed but always appreciated artifact enchantment. Like we're past like the days of like smelt or whatever. Limited needs good
Yeah,
ways to deal with artifacts enchantment that don't feel awful to put in your deck.
yeah, I think that's fine. I'm not a fan of modal cards that are actually secretly always you choose these two modes and you can also choose this mode sometimes. Like it feels like it I don't know it just has a bad feel to me. Maybe that's just me being aggro about things that don't matter, but
Well, and I think that there is
it
like a
feels
definite thing where like when you're top decking with this, uh, or sometimes you want to have like a blocker up or you want to attack with your creature. I think there are definitely times when you're just like, okay, I'm just gonna make a 1/1 and then like cycle and then just like cycle away, or like I'm just gonna use this to pump up like my flying creature and then hit for and then use it to hit in for enough to do lethal next turn and so on and so forth. I think there's more play to this card than maybe is being given
there's a
credit
little
for.
more, yeah.
Because
There is a
because
little, yeah.
tapping that additional creature is not always free.
That is true. Um, I don't know. I feel like there is definitely a normal mode for this card and some abnormal modes for this card. I don't hate that. Um, but yeah, that's probably fine. Maybe I'm just being too persnickety about it. The one thing I guess about the flavor is I don't know why the village meeting is doing these things like someone showing okay I'll try to my interpretation of the flavor is some guy shows up to a meeting, some number of people talk about what they're going to do, and then depending on how many people show up and talk about the things at the meeting, that's how many things you can get done. And you can knock down that artifact or enchantment that everyone's been complaining about, or you can restore some creature, or you can get some abstract thing does. No, I've talked myself into liking the flavor. I've talked myself into
Yeah,
liking the flavor.
it feels pretty reasonable.
People yeah, people show up for a meeting. Some number of them talk about a thing, and then that's the amount of stuff that they can get done. I it takes a moment to understand what's going on here flavor wise. No, I think I've the more I've complained about the card, the more I've talked myself into actually secretly liking it. It's just I feel like it does loads of things and you have to stop and think about why it's doing those things before it all makes sense to you. But when it does kind of click. Like it has a slow burn of actually getting what's going on here, I guess is the thing. Which is good because some cards mechanically, like that's the difference between having that's a scale issue basically. That's the point of having like skill levels in Magic the Gathering is that you can have cards that not everyone will know how to use properly because they're bad at game, and that's what being bad at game is. But some people will be able to use them more effectively or understand them better. Not necessarily in terms of the flavor, but also there's
Yeah,
players who are going to be
and again,
more
modal
neutral.
cards are like traditionally one of the foremost examples of spike cards, right? Where
Yeah,
charms and commands are typically underestimated by the average player because they're like, this is doing weak stuff. Why don't I just play better card? And the question is, and the reason is modality good. But yeah, um,
modality good. I mean, if anyone's confused about why modality good, like compare Shatter to Vindicate. You know, Vindicate isn't doing any more things than Shatter is. It's just it has more possibilities of what it can do than
yeah,
Shatter does. It's doing the same thing only to a broader spectrum of possible targets.
yeah. There's a lot of cards that
Um,
are like in Magic that could be formatted as modal, and because they simply aren't, because that would take more text and we have better syntax, people tend to not evaluate them in the same way. I think that's a good
yeah,
way of like I think the Vindicate Shatter example is Not one that I would have brought up myself, but makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
obviously it's not a great example because there's
a different mana cost going
or
on,
the different
completely different colors, but
well, it's the reason it costs more is because it's capable of doing more stuff. But also things that can only destroy creatures. But or for example, imagine a card that could be a Doomblade or a Dead of Night or a Power Word Kill or
yeah,
then it basically ends up being murder because it can do all of these things that individually cost one and a black, but it has to cost. I mean, I think we're ready for Wonder Black Murder, but that's not a conversation that anyone's going to have with me.
yeah.
But because it does all,
we're,
because it
we're
no,
already on a tangent. We're
don't
already on
need
a
to know what.
no, no. We're already on a tangent. We
Don't
don't
really
need to
as
get. We
well
don't need to get
to
into a
knowing to
tangent of a
do this. To be
tangent.
fair,
Let's
but
center ourselves and let's talk about the next card.
yeah, but the point is modality good. Um, so the last card that we have for you today is Village Scorn. So it's a sorcery for one and a red and a white, and it says choose one. If a creature you control died this turn, you may choose both. And the modes are create two 1/1 white human creature tokens, and Village Scorn deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the number of creatures you control, and this is designed by Red Bay. So the flavor is pretty obvious. Like a village is angry, and it's even angrier if you've killed one of their dudes. And then either they show up angrily or they deal damage to your creature or planeswalker by the number of them that have shown up angrily, or they do both.
Yeah, this is the most like
Um,
Innistrad card that I think we've talked about today, and that's really saying something given the theme. Um, because like
it's such a red white humans card.
yeah,
It,
we
it
and no, and
is
like specifically the creature dying is like the morbid of it is I think what really pushed it over
yeah.
to Innistrad,
Well,
Innistrad, Innistrad.
it just reminds me of all of the sort of like burn at the stake and uh, something justice, the one that pings
Mob
whenever a
justice.
creature is
Is that mob
mob
justice?
justice. I can't remember. And all of the sort of gather the townsfolk ones creating bunch of token human
Yeah,
creatures
I think that like that
and
might even be like it's resonant, but there is a worry that it sort of gets like lost in the crowd if this were to be printed. Like
yeah, it feels like it's the apotheosis of Innistrad red white humans, if that makes sense.
yep, yep.
It isn't even a human tribal card apart from making human tokens, but it just feels like it's sort of an amalgamation of all of the things that I associate with humans on Innistrad, flavor wise. Like we have angry humans that go around dealing damage depending on how many there are and creating lots of tokens, and this and dying all over the place. And this sort of feels like it's just the end point that all of those were slowly merging towards, which I don't hate that. Um, but yeah, I feel like this is probably like if I had to guess what this is trying to be, it's like red white like token archon where it's like you're creating lots of expendable tokens and also you're dealing damage based on the number of creatures you're controlling. Like creatures dying and creating tokens and number of creatures you control will feel conducive to that. So that's the kind of archetype I feel like this is supporting. I think it does it well. Like my concerns about the flavor of it being a bit generic aside, you know, it may be generic flavor of angry mob of townsfolk, but at least it sells that well.
Oh, yeah, I mean like I don't I agree. I think that like we've seen like the group fight, quote unquote, Kabira takedown as like a sort of all for one sort of flavor beat. It works. And again, this is another one where I'm like It is a good
Oh,
arc.
speaking of compare takedown, sorry, one other criticism. And this is a hot take. I don't think this card needs to be red. In modern Magic, I don't think this card needs to be red.
Oh yeah, it doesn't. I think that again, and this also gives me like it gives me very like it is selling an archetype, right? We talked about how it's selling humans, but I'm like, or like selling go wide, which is humans in Innistrad. But I'm like, could this? I'm like, I'm very like push your commons brained, but not push your commons and like make them all like ridiculous way, but like push your commons and make them all attractive and point in a specific direction to get the most value out of them. And this feels like a great example of that because like on its own, it's just sort of like a modal raise the alarm slash removal spell, which is already fine. But then it pushes you to have a lot of sacrifice synergies or to make aggressive trades, which is always good for limited. So like, uh, I think that this would be a fine common, and it's maybe even a little weak for uncommon. That's my hot take for right now.
Um, I hmm. I think it's fine at uncommon if there's another uncommon to be the Archon. Like, I I feel like this is uncommon material, but I don't think it's Archon material. In fact, just take the red off and move it to a white slot. Make it two and a white, and I'm happy with it being at uncommon. I don't like this much complexity at common. Like it's not that complex, but it feels like it's doing too many different things for me to want to look at it as a common.
I don't know. I kind of disagree just because like it has very simple modes that are easily comprehensible and like are like sort of staples of environments, and the what does it do when morbid is not like it isn't like that much more to remember or consider if you're like if you're across the table from this, right? It's just basically the same thing except +2 damage. If you're playing around village, if you're playing around like Kabira Takedown, you play around this in much the same way. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I guess. I mean, I think it's fine. My lukewarm take is that it doesn't have to be red at all. Um, and your hot take is that it can be common. I don't despise it at common, but I'm not. Maybe I'm just being too cautious about what effects I allow at common. Maybe you're secretly being more big brained about this than me, but to me that does feel exactly uncommon to me.
and yeah, I think I would not bat an eye if this was at common or uncommon. I think it's just like because again, like different environments, there's some cards that sort of like straddle that line, and I think that like especially with things that can be in this case two for ones or uh, like archetype or specific removal. I would not again. Those all make sense at uncommon, but I also think that this is in the realm where, with the leaps and bounds that limited environments have made in the past 2 years, I think that this is of a power level and
Yeah, that's
complexity that's
fair.
appropriate, or potentially appropriate
I
at
think
common.
maybe I just because I haven't been keeping up with Canon Magic enough. I think is the problem because I kind of stopped playing a while back. We have instant speed divination now. That's something that I didn't expect would happen. Um,
Yeah, okay.
I
See,
don't know.
that one is even a step too far for me, but that's a totally different conversation. Yeah,
That's a totally different. That's a totally different conversation. No,
but yeah,
maybe Fire Design has made it so that this can be a common. Maybe I'm just being too cautious. Um,
but I think that
but yeah,
ultimately, I
it,
just want
it,
to. I think this sort of conversation is a good encapsulation of like the amount of subjectivity that goes into a lot of design discussions, and ultimately it just comes down to like what perspective are you coming from, what are you like, because ultimately because again we both have like good like stuff to point to in terms of like what rarities has been at cards, similar cards been at previously, like the question of complexity. It just sometimes it just comes down to you gotta play test it and see what works. There is like no
yeah,
theory can only take you so far.
I mean, I mean,
And this might be a situation where like one or both of us are just straight up wrong or not considering something, but I'm just saying like there's inherent subjectivity.
I wouldn't be like completely phased by this showing up as a multicolored archon. I wouldn't be phased by it showing up two and a white in just the uncommon slot. I would be a little surprised to see it as a monocolored common. I think I could just about say it's multicolored on a multicolored common. You know that I wouldn't bat an eye at this card at a lot of different positions. I think depending on what the best of the limited looks like, this could be any of them. But the fact that I think the fact that we're sort of going, what should be the rarity and mana cost, or what should be the rarity and colors of this, rather than trying to change anything about what the card actually does. I think that's an indication that it's a pretty good card, and we're just sort of, trying to give it those final bits of polish to make it fit right. So again, this one's another one that I think is just genuinely a good design. I can see what it's doing, and it's doing it pretty well, I would say.
Yeah.
And then you just have to figure out where it fits in your set skeleton, and because also in a set that isn't a multicolored set at heart, I would feel a lot more justified putting it in monocolor. Whereas if you're you know if you're trying to get players to play multicolor anywhere, if you're trying to push that in your set, then maybe making it two colors instead of one is more justified. But I I'm generally an advocate for never doing something in two colors that could be done in one of those colors. Um, yep, that's fine. Sorry, I am rambling. I
So
do that.
so with that, we're coming to the end of today's episode. Once again, thanks everyone for watching. In the description, you can find the full MSC set file, which has all the cards we talked about today, plus some that we didn't get to, including many, many references to the "It Takes a Village" saying, uh, and um, in the description, we also have a list of all the prompts for the days of the month and a link to the Beacon of Creation server and instructions on how you can submit your cards through LackeyBot to the shared file if you want them to be potentially considered for future videos, or if you just want other people to look at them when they download the file. And thank you, Legion, for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and yeah,
Thank you for having me. I didn't know that this was how I was going to be spending my 1 to 2 a.m. On a Friday evening, but Saturday morning, whatever time it is. But I'm glad I did. It's been fun. So thanks again for having me, and yeah, um,
yeah,
yeah.
the, and,
That's me. I have nothing else to say. I don't know. I don't know what else I'm saying. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And until next time.
Invite me on again sometime, and
No,
I will
and
talk too long again.
but yeah,
Invite me on again, and I'll come up with a better outro.
no, I think that sounds like the start of like a remix. Like yeah, 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 and then that just turns into the beat. But okay, I'm also loopy, so I'm gonna go get some water, get some food, get some good night's rest. But until next time, this is Caillou signing off.